Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, today we are talking about what is personally my favorite exotic in the game, Antaeus Wars. Now, before we get into the pros, the cons, the how-to, and all that, just a little bit of lore about the man's Antaeus himself. Now, Antaeus was actually a figure in Greek mythology. He was the son of Poseidon and Mother Earth Gaia, and he was able to draw strength from his mom as long as he was in contact with her, and because of this he was able to remain invincible so long as his feet were touching the earth, and he would challenge people who passed by his area to wrestling matches, which he would always win, and then he killed them in the end and made a temple out of their skulls. And then along came Heracles, and Heracles figured out that Antaeus was invincible by touching the ground and promptly picked him up. And that was kind of the end of Antaeus. But anyways, let's get down to business. So I'm going to give an overview list of the pros and cons to these boots, and then I'll go more in depth on these points later on in the video. So first things first, you get an increased slide distance, you get a reflective shield, which has some big play potential behind it. You also get a quicker supercharge, and you also get a slight super extension. As for the cons of these boots, you will be experiencing some misadventure deaths from time to time. The more you use these boots, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason why it happens. Another con, it's also not a passive exotic. It doesn't do X for you. You have to do X to gain Y, and if you do not do X, you will not gain Y. These boots also somewhat depend on your enemies, what they do, how they react to you, that sort of thing. Lastly, there's also a cooldown on the reflective vents perk itself. It lasts about 2 Mississippi seconds or every other slide. To elaborate on another pro I mentioned earlier about the quicker supercharge / super extension. So outside of deflecting supers and heavy ammo, Antaeus Wards also blocks bullets from primaries and special weapons to an extent. It blocks shotguns the most consistently. Snipers deflects sometimes, you just typically take reduced damage, but you can deflect and kill with them. Fusions deflect inconsistently. It either successfully deflects and you kill your enemy, or you end up just dying to a misadventure. I should also note that misadventure deaths do not count as a kill towards the enemy. You won't see their scoreboard go up for it, and they won't gain super energy for that kill, so long as they did not damage you before your reflective shield goes up. Deflecting anything, so long as you hear that shing sort of sound cue, will grant you super energy. And this counts during your super, and it grants the same amount of energy. It's not that much, but it might grant you an extra smash with your striker, or for my Sunbreaker mains, it might grant you another hammer in your super. And Lord knows how many times we've been in our super, we come to the end of it, and then this happens. It all happens to us. We all hate it when it does. I just want to know why we're not talking about it. Alright, but to mention another con I talked about earlier, your enemies. So you have to predict when your enemy is going to do something. I'll talk more about that in a second. Not all enemies are created equal. Some have different reaction speeds, different habits when it comes to gunfights, etc. And they may target someone else altogether over you while you're trying to slide in to deflect something, in which case you're just kind of caught out in the open with your pants down. Alright, so how do you make use of Antaeus Wards? How do you make use of the pros? First point I want to make here is that the most utility you'll find is winning shotgun battles, charging your super quicker, and having an increased slide distance. You'll be eating buckshot for breakfast and sliding around like it's a goddamn slip and slide. Now, these boots can deflect supers and heavy ammo, but realistically speaking, that won't be happening that often. It can be game-changing in something like competitive when it does happen, but there's a whole bunch of factors that go into whether or not you're able to deflect something like a super or a rocket launcher. which brings me to my second point. Start sliding into your gunfights. Make a habit of it. The shield, as you peek the corner, will typically take some damage from your opponent who's peeking the lane, and I should also note that primaries can very rarely kill. It has happened to me, but it does not regularly happen. But whether you're deflecting primary, special weapons, super heavy, whatever, it'll grant super energy so long as you hear that sound cue. Now, as you're making a habit of sliding around the map and sliding into your gunfights, you'll start inadvertently deflecting other things. In my case, I've deflected things like smoke bombs, storm collars. Hell, there was one time where I even deflected a shadow shot. But as you're sliding around the map, sliding into your gunfights, you'll again be inadvertently deflecting other things like grenades, which are typically thrown on entry or exit of a duel. I'll show you this clip as an example. So I'm playing competitive, I tag up this Titan right here, and he tries to go behind cover to get away because he's tagged up, and I slide in and I push him. He tries to throw a grenade to get me to back off to cover his retreat, and I end up deflecting it out of the way and picking up the kill. And last point I want to make here is pay attention to your opponents. What loadouts are they running? What subclass do they use? Do they pick up heavy ammo? Is there supercharged? Things like that. These sort of things are especially important in competitive to know what you're going up against, and I always check my enemy's loadout whenever I'm loading into a match. Alright, so next big point I want to make, and that is how to predict your enemy's movements. So everyone has their own play style, but some things are just universal no matter what. For example, a hunter that is just jumping out in the open a bit bolder than usual is more than likely going to blade barrage you, especially if you're in your super or if you're carrying heavy ammo. A sentinel who's too far away to shield bash you is going to huck a shield at you. Hammers, Dawnblade, Golden Gun will almost always target you if you are the closest one to them. And if your opponent just picked up heavy ammo and you're on their radar, they are going to aim for you. So next point, how to time the slide. And I should note that this is not an exact science. Again, these boots partly depend on your enemies and what they decide to do. So whenever you're shotgunning and trying to time the slide, you should time it so that your shield is up when you decide to shoot, because that's typically when your enemy is going to shoot back at you as well. In the case of blade barrage, you want to try to time the slide in between sound cues. So have the shield go up in between the two sound cues of a blade barrage. And by the two sound cues, I mean there is one sound cue. I'll play a clip here. There's one sound cue whenever the hunter casts his blade barrage, and then there's another sound cue that follows as the knives come down. When dealing with things like hammers and Dawnblade, you want to close the gap and slide into them, thus making your shield a bigger target for them to hit. If you're trying to get a visual as to what I'm talking about, hold your thumb out at arm's length in front of you and then bring it closer to your face. And you'll notice that your thumb covers more of your environment. In most cases, you should be trying to slide out of cover towards whatever it is you're trying to deflect. Most dudes in the Crucible are just trying to react as quick as possible to oncoming targets. If they see you on their radar and they see you pop out of cover, most of the time they're just going to aim at you and just try to react to you. They're not going to see the reflective shield up, and trying to deflect something out in the open is much more difficult than doing it from coming out of cover. Alright, so that's going to conclude part 1 of this guide. I'm going to make a part 2 covering the nuances, things you need to know, and an updated version of the Minuteman build that I have concocted. Plan to have that up somewhat soon. As soon as it is, I'll post a link down in the description below. So yeah, that's all I got. See ya.